At Evergreen Mutual, the pen slid across the desk toward me like a little silver blade. "Just sign, Mom," Jenna said, bright as a TV anchor. Brad's hand settled on my shoulder, more grip than comfort, his thumb finding the tendon that always twinged when the weather changed. I kept my face pleasant for the security camera, and when the teller glanced up, folded a receipt in my palm and wrote in block letters, "Help, this isn't my choice." The branch manager's smile thinned. She stepped to the glass doors and turned the lock with a quiet click that sounded louder than any alarm. 3 months earlier, nothing in my life needed alarms. I was Helen Mercer, 68, widow-keeper of a small yellow house in Tacoma that smelled faintly of lemon oil and coffee. I had a square of dahlias in the front yard and a row of mason jars on the kitchen shelf, each labeled in my careful script, Nutmeg Bay Clove. Mornings I walked the waterfront boardwalk. Afternoons I volunteered at the library, reshelving mysteries, whose endings I always guessed by page 50. Evenings I called the Mariners game on the radio, while I wrote notes in a ledger I still kept out of habit, from the decades I did the books for Mercer Marine, the shop my husband ran until his heart betrayed him too early. My life fit in my hands. It never once felt like it might be pried away. Then Jenna called on a Tuesday with her voice pitched to the exact note people use for skittish animals. "Mom, I've been thinking about you living alone." In the background, I heard a lower voice Brad say, "Mention the stairs." She went on about slippery steps and bad lighting and what if. I looked at the 3 low risers from the sunroom to the kitchen and at the motion-sensing lamp I'd installed myself. "I'm fine," I said, because I was, and because the word had always meant something in our family. "Mr. Alvarez next door looks in on me, and the library is a block away." "It's not just about you," she said, which for Jenna often meant it was exactly about what she wanted. Over the next weeks, they came by with paper bags of takeout and the thick gravity of concern. I poured tea. Brad toured the house like an adjuster after a storm, tapping the throw rug with his shoe and holding up my step stool like an incriminating exhibit. "These are trip hazards," he informed me, as if I'd never used my own legs. "We only want you safe," Jenna added, smoothing my sleeve. I recognized the look she gave her 3 kids when she wanted them to say, "Please," sweet, almost tender, and unmovable as granite. It sharpened the day they brought a manila folder. Sticky flags sprouted like weeds from its edges. "We've put together a few things," Jenna said. Brad fanned out documents with long titles and small print. Durable power of attorney, healthcare proxy, small stuff, standard. A place for my signature bloomed in yellow. "Let's not do small stuff tonight," I said lightly. "I'd like my attorney to read these." It was the oldest sentence in the world, and it still worked like a doorstop. The temperature tilted. Brad's smile didn't reach his eyes. Jenna's mouth made a small O of hurt. "Don't you trust us?" Trust, I could see, had been recast as agreement. After that, the calls multiplied. "You missed Ava's orchestra concert," Jenna said. I hadn't even been invited." "Mrs. Leary told me you seemed confused at Safeway," she added. "Mrs. Leary has never said more than hello to me in 20 years. Brad arrived one morning just to check the fridge and took photos of my prescription bottles without asking. "So we can help you stay organized," he said, turning the label until the dosage faced his camera. He started sentences with statistics show and ended them by looking at me the way people look at an egg carton they suspect is cracked. 2 weeks into the campaign, I opened my pill organizer Sunday through Saturday in blue letters, the way I liked it, and found the compartments scrambled. Tuesday held Friday, Friday held Tuesday, and the calcium had somehow become blood pressure. I stood at the counter with the box in my hand and felt the floor shift a half-inch under my feet. I was careful. I'd always been careful. "Mom," Jenna breathed over the phone when I called. "This is exactly what we're worried about." I set the little box down and did what I do when I can't trust the room. I went through the house with a notebook inventorying what could be counted. The tax receipts were where they always were. The electric bill had been paid last week. The rug measured 2 feet by 3 and lay square under the coffee table like it had for years. If my life had developed a rattle, the sound wasn't coming from me. Brad stopped by later with a printout about household accidents among seniors highlighted in neon like a term paper. He used my full name in a tone that sounded like a caution sign. "Helen, nobody is saying you can't handle things now. But what about down the road?" He listed scenarios, each worse than the last, piling what-ifs like sandbags. I looked at his neat beard and gleaming watch and thought not for the first time that insurance is a profession built on persuading people to picture disaster more vividly than their own lives. I called an old number from a blue business card I kept in my ledger, Alan Rhee, attorney at law. He'd helped Warren and me with probate when the shop changed hands. He had kind eyes and an unassuming office above a bakery that made butter cookies shaped like leaves. "Alan," I said, "my daughter brought some papers I'd like you to see." I heard the pause before his voice dropped into something like listening. Bring them in, Helen. Don't sign anything. Alan's office smelled like coffee and sugar and printer toner. He spread the documents on his desk and read in silence, his finger following the text. Halfway down the first page, he hummed once the way you do when you find a seam where there shouldn't be one. These aren't protective, he said finally. They're comprehensive. They would let someone else move your money, sell your house, and make medical decisions without needing to ask you. He angled the paper so I could see the clause that gave away my name and my timing. Who prepared these? Brad says his company's legal department reviewed them, I said. Alan didn't smile. Insurance counsel isn't your counsel. Back home, I passed the hallway mirror and caught my own eyes. They were clear. My hair had decided to go white without asking, and my mouth had more lines than last summer, but the gaze was the same one that taught long division to a whole Girl Scout troop, because the school was short on math volunteers. I set the manila folder on the kitchen table, made a fresh pot of coffee, and wrote out everything I could remember from the last 3 weeks' dates, who said what small oddities that might have been nothing if they hadn't been so neatly aligned. The pill organizer. The concert I'd never heard about. The photographs of my prescriptions. When I finished, the page looked like a map someone else had drawn for me. It showed a road with a gentle bend that became with surprising speed a cliff edge. Jenna called that night precisely at 8, our old time from when she lived 3 time zones away. How was your day? She asked. Bright as if cheerfulness could solder over a widening crack. I took a walk, I said. The sound was slate blue. Mom, she said lightly, ignoring the water and the sky. Brad and I should come Saturday morning to help you sort your paperwork. He's good at this. Through work. Brad sells policies. He is indeed good at persuading people to hand him things. I can manage, I said. There was the small pause where her patience reset. We'll bring cinnamon rolls. I thought of the ledger, the mirror, the note I'd written for myself, and the way the room steadied whenever I wrote something down. The little house was quiet. The boardwalk would be colder in the morning. The dahlias had gone leggy and needed stakes. I stood in my own kitchen in my own light and felt the tilt inside me find its level. Let's not plan anything, I told her. Not yet. She exhaled like a door easing shut. Okay, Mom. After we hung up, I washed the cups, dried them, and put them on the shelf with the labels facing forward. In the living room, the radio murmured about a late rally at T-Mobile Park. I turned the volume down until it was only a thread of sound and sat with my hands around nothing at all, as if that empty space were the thing that needed holding. Outside, a fairy horn drifted up the hill. I wrote the time in the margin of my notes and underlined it twice. I slept with the ledger on the nightstand. In the morning, the ledger was still there, square as a brick, its edges leaving a faint crease in the quilt. I set it back on the desk and opened the blinds. The sound was the color of a pencil lead, and gulls worked the air like scraps of paper blown up from the ferry dock. I made coffee and buttered toast and told myself I had time. Time, in my experience, is only useful if you spend it before someone else does. They arrived at 9 on the dot with a white box tied in bakery string. Cinnamon rolls, Jenna sang like a song from a commercial. The twins vaulted up my porch steps and were halfway to the kitchen before their father cleared his throat and reminded them of manners. Ava, wiry and composed as a metronome even out of her orchestra chair, kissed my cheek and whispered that the oboe part had finally stopped squeaking. I kissed the top of her head and breathed in the saccharine dough and the scent of Jenna's hairspray, the one she pretended not to use. Brad set a leather folio on my table and peeled the string from the bakery box with the precision of a man opening a package he hadn't paid for. We thought he said we might take care of a few things while we're all together. He laid out a stack of forms. Not the same ones as before, these were thinner, the kind of thick bond paper that aims to look official without actually being so. What are these? I asked, though I could see the headings before he answered. Just convenience authorizations, he said. Adding our names for signatures in case there's an emergency. Backup signers, no control, purely practical. There is a precise difference between a spare key and a duplicate deed. I took my time the way you do when you know someone is watching the clock. The twins were arguing under their breath about who got the center role. Ava asked if she could practice at my house later because my living room didn't echo. Jenna slid the forms a 1/4 inch closer to me. I'd like Alan to take the look, I said, keeping my tone even. He's expecting to. It's Saturday. Brad said like days of the week were regulations. And this isn't legal. Well, it is legal, but not complicated. Standard banking. I had our compliance desk review the wording. I looked at the second page. Joint holders, I read aloud. The words sat there, shiny as molars. That's not backup. That's equal. Equal access. Jenna corrected, swallowing a piece of pastry she hadn't seemed to chew. For emergencies only. I have autopay, I said, and a brain. Brad's smile did not move. We've got an appointment at Evergreen Mutual 11 o'clock. My buddy will notarize so it's smooth, saves you a trip. So that was why the bakery string had been cut so cleanly, we were already wrapped. You made an appointment, I said. For you, Jenna said as if there were no distinction. The twins had sugar stripes on their lips. I handed them napkins and sent them out to the backyard to see if any of the late raspberries had survived the birds. Ava volunteered to supervise. She liked small jobs with clear rules. When the screen door slapped shut and the house exhaled, Brad smoothed the stack so the corners aligned. It was a small movement, but it belonged to a person who expected things to fit the frame he chose. Bring your ID, he said. I'll bring my purse, I replied. He took that for a yes, which told me a lot about how the rest of his day would go. On the drive, I watched my neighborhood tilt into Strip Mall and then into the bank district near the freeway. Traffic stitched itself together, impatient and loud. Jenna kept up a patter about band fundraisers and parent-teacher nights, as if naming small civic duties could prove a bigger virtue. Brad's hands were at 10 and 2. He told me casually that their friend from Harbor Crest Notary by day, CrossFit by morning, was squeezing us in. He's a lifesaver, Brad said, which is what people say when they want you to think gratitude is the sensible response to being cornered. Evergreen Mutual's lobby smelled of carpet cleaner and metal. The ceiling was the kind that collects summer heat and autumn dust. Behind the counter, a young teller with a cardigan the color of robin's eggs looked up and smiled. She had the kind eyes that would make you forgive a typo. A door opened near the offices, and a woman in a fitted jacket came out. She carried a clipboard as if it were part of her spine. Ms. Mercer, she said, reading my name from the appointment list. I'm Nora Patel, branch manager. Why don't we step into my office? Brad answered for me. Great, we're adding joint holders for convenience. Should be straightforward. Nora's gaze moved to my face and stayed there steady as a hand on a back railing. Of course, she said, but to me. Let's make sure we get it right. Her office was small and clearer than the lobby, a glass panel on one side and a framed print of a forest on the other. The desk had the kind of neat that meant someone liked knowing where things were. Brad's friend the notary was already there, a man with cufflinks shaped like tiny compasses. Cole Benson, he said, hand outstretched like a fishing rod you hadn't asked to hold. He set his stamp on the desk with a little thud. Should be quick. Nothing's quick if it's important, Nora said without sweetness. She sat and pulled up my accounts. All right, Mrs. Mercer, I'm going to review the changes we're making. I'll need to hear from you directly that you understand and consent. That's our policy. She understands, Jenna said fast and bright. Nora didn't look away from me. I need to hear it from her. I looked at Jenna, my daughter, a woman who used to draw horses on construction paper and tape them to my fridge, and at Brad, who had been a decent dad to his kids, and a sharp dresser to everyone else, and then at Cole's bright metal stamp. I opened my purse, took out a teller receipt from last week, and with my pen wrote 3 words in block capitals, the way I used to letter posters for the school carnival. Help not my choice. When the teller from the lobby came in with water, I pressed the folded slip into her palm, along with my thanks, an extra long touch between fingertips. She hesitated the tiniest catch in a practiced motion, then nodded once and left. Nora's phone vibrated. She glanced at it and then at me and said, Before we proceed, I'm going to complete a standard verification step with Mrs. Mercer alone. Brad's smile nicked a little. Is that necessary? For significant changes, Nora said already standing it is. She held the door and Jenna and Brad stepped through into the hall. Cole gathered his papers with a rustle and followed. When the door clicked shut, Nora turned the lock. The sound was delicate and final. She sat down again and leaned forward, not quite into my space, but near enough that a whisper wouldn't have to carry. Do you need assistance, Mrs. Mercer? Yes, I said, and my relief surprised me by sounding calm. I don't want this, they insisted. I brought papers to my attorney last week. He told me not to sign a thing. Are you safe at home? I am, I said, and then because precision matters for now. Nora slid a small form across the desk. I'm required to report suspected financial exploitation. I will file that. In the short term, here's what I can do today. I can note your concern on the account flag transactions for review and ensure our internal cameras capture this appointment thoroughly. I will also document that you were separated from the other parties asked directly and that you expressed hesitation. I'm afraid if I refuse, they'll escalate, I said. They've been building a case, making it look like I'm not managing. I understand, she said. Do you consent to me proceeding in the room with them present with the knowledge that I will be asking you the same questions again on the record? I do, I said. She unlocked the door and called them back. Jenna flashed a relieved smile as if we'd just finished a routine mammogram. Brad rolled his shoulders like someone limbering up before a very small game he was sure of winning. Cole lifted the stamp in his palm and glanced at his watch as if the ink were on a timer. Nora positioned her monitor so the reflection from the glass panel didn't wash it out and turned on an audio recorder built into the computer. For our files, she said neutral to the room. She asked me to state my name, the date, and the purpose of the appointment. I did. Mrs. Mercer, Nora said, Do you understand that adding joint holders gives those persons full authority to withdraw, transfer, and close accounts, that they may do so without prior notice to you? I understand that's what the paper says, I replied. Do you want to proceed? My mouth went dry the way it does when you have to swallow something that will not go down. Jenna leaned in with that same bright expression used on children who don't like cough syrup. Brad's thumb found the tendon at my shoulder. It was not a squeeze that left a bruise. It didn't need to be. It was a squeeze that said the air was his. Yes, I said, letting the word land oddly like a glass set on a crooked coaster. Noted, Nora said, and the click of the keys sounded like honest work. Cole had me sign and then pressed his seal into the paper with a little ceremony that tried to make it look like nothing much. It left a crisp ring on the page, a tiny wreath around my name. We finished and Nora straightened the forms and slid me a business card with a second number written on the back. Call me if you have questions, she said. At any hour. I slipped the card behind my driver's license. When we stood, the office suddenly seemed smaller, as if we had all taken up too much space in it. In the lobby, the Robin's Egg cardigan teller looked at me for a second too long. I nodded once, the kind of nod women learn over a lifetime to mean I'm fine and I'm not. And please see both. On the way home, the twins fell asleep with sugar-sticky fingers. Ava practiced a passage in her head, tapping out notes on her thighs. Jenna chattered about weekend schedules that seemed to multiply as she spoke them. Brad drove like a man who had just located a new lane and found it open. See, Jenna said, that wasn't so bad. Smooth, Brad said. At home, I cut the remaining rolls into quarters and set them on a plate, and sent the kids back to the car with a Ziploc of raspberries because I'd promised, and because whatever else was happening in this household of ours fruit should not go to waste. Jenna hugged me light-perfumed and told me she was proud of me for being practical. The word rang like a utensil knocked accidentally against the sink. When the house was quiet again, I washed my hands and dialed Alan. He picked up on the second ring, breathless paper in his voice. I told him everything, the appointment, the door lock, the card with the second number, the way Nora's eyes hadn't flinched, the bright stamp. Brad's thumb on the tendon that hurt in rain. Helen, he said, and in 3 syllables there was praise and worry, and an assessment I didn't need him to say aloud. We'll move, he said. Now. I set the phone on the table and opened my banking app. The balances sat there like deep water you can't tell the depth of by looking. For an hour they didn't ripple. I made soup. I wrote the time in the ledger each time I checked. At 6:12 p.m., a line appeared. Elec transfer 4950 sa issue to CHK 4271. The digits at the end were not mine. I stared at the number and felt nothing for a full breath, like the way pain delays itself after a cut. Then I took Nora's card and dialed the handwritten number. She answered on the second ring. Ms. Patel speaking. It's Helen, I said. A transfer just went out, 4,950. She paused long enough that I knew she was looking at a screen. I see it, she said. I'm marking it for review. I will also escalate our internal report. I'm sorry, Mrs. Mercer. Will it come back? Not tonight, she said. But this helps me help you. Is that meant to be comforting? It's meant to be true, she said. An hour later, Jenna texted a photo of a brochure with stock photos of seniors playing cards at round tables. Willow Harbor Assisted Living was written in a serif font that wanted you to believe in lace curtains and staff who knew your name. Thought you'd like to see this one, she wrote. Amazing activities, close to us. We can tour this week. Brad already spoke to intake. I set the phone face down. Then I turned it back over and read the name again the way you read a word to see if your eyes will change it. They didn't. On Sunday, church let out in its usual stream of wool coats and sensible shoes. I don't attend, but I live 2 blocks over and my street carries their echo. In the afternoon, Mr. Alvarez knocked to return a casserole pan I'd sent home with his wife when their youngest had strep. He lingered at the threshold as if the air inside my house were too still, and he was a man who knows when to keep a breeze moving. Todo bien, he asked. All well. Estoy bien, I said, and smiled and didn't add the clause that wanted so badly to be spoken aloud to Memento. That evening, when the sky was an even gray and the radio droned about bullpen woes, Jenna called. Okay, she said without preface. Good news. We put a small hold at Willow Harbor. Just to save your spot. Nothing binding. Whose money? There was the smallest of silences, the kind that proves the person you're speaking to recognizes the question as a dart with a point. It's just a placeholder, she said. We can lose it if you don't like the tour. I like my house, I said. Mom, she said, softening the word until it might as well have been a washcloth. It's time to accept help. We're not the enemy. I didn't say you were, I answered. I said I like my house. She pivoted as skilled people do when they realize one angle is blocked. Ava's recital is Saturday, she said. You'll come, won't you? If you send me the time, I said. Of course, she said, new brightness fitted snug over the old. We'll text. After the call, I stood in the kitchen where light from the street lamps made a dim, even square on the linoleum. I lifted the pill organizer, emptied its contents into my palm, and poured each tablet into the correct slot with the same care I always had. Then I snapped each lid shut. The sound was satisfying in a way I cannot explain to anyone who has not had their competence called into question by a person who used to need you to tie their shoes. On Monday, I carried the ledger to Alan's office and the blue business card, and Nora's number written again on paper in case the ink on the card decided to smudge. The bakery downstairs had switched to ginger cookies shaped like stars. The printer in the next office whirred like a distant lawnmower. Alan took my notes and copied what needed copying and asked me questions that proved he had read every line. He is not one for speeches, which is a quality I admire in anyone whose job involves paper. When I left, the clouds had lifted, and the light did that Pacific Northwest thing that makes every oiled plank of a dock look like a painting. I walked 2 blocks out of my way just to smell salt and diesel. My phone pinged. A message from Brad Chipper Banking's A Team Sport. Glad we're on the same side. I turned the phone off. It felt like closing a window that someone else had been leaning into. In the afternoon, Ava came by to practice, and we spent 20 minutes trying to get a stubborn A to stop sounding like a complaint. She wanted tea. I made some and showed her the dahlias, tall and slightly ridiculous on their stakes. She said they looked like fireworks captured mid-burst. I thought of that when she packed up, how some things expand outward while keeping a center while other things just scatter. After she left, I checked my accounts again. No movement since the 4,950. I wrote the date and time and the absence of motion in the ledger because absence is also information. The house hummed with its small evening sounds, the tick of the settling oven, the far-off slap of a screen door, somewhere down the block, the fairy horn marking the hour for people who still listen for that. When I turned out the kitchen light, the window turned into a mirror. My face hovered there, half in the glass and half out of it, like a transparency teachers use on overhead projectors to show how one map lies over another. Behind the reflection, the garden was a rectangle of darker dark. The dahlias nodded. The street lamp stitched light along the porch rail. I set the ledger on the end table and put a pen beside it, and then I sat down, because there are moments when the best thing a person can do is sit very still and let the room be itself. By Tuesday, the phone had learned a new trick, ringing at the top of every even hour. If I didn't answer, texts arrived in pairs, one sweet from Jenna, one efficient from Brad, like weather fronts colliding. Mr. Alvarez paused longer than usual at my mailbox when he saw me out front and asked without asking if I needed anything from the store. I told him I was set. After lunch, I checked my accounts again and watched a new line appear as plainly as a seagull landing on Blackwater ELC transfer, $14,750 to UK. D'Auchan 4271, the memo field said Willow Harbor Deposit. I dialed Nora's card. She picked up on the second ring. I see it, she said before I finished the sentence. I'm escalating the file and adding surveillance notes from Saturday. Do you have enough, I asked. We're past enough, she said, and then more carefully. Inside the bank, my part is clear. Outside, you'll need your attorney. At 4, a brochure slid through my mail slot with a cheerful slap. On the front, 2 silver-haired people played cards at a round table under perfect light. The font announced Willow Harbor, where care means community. At the bottom, stapled to the corner, was a pink receipt. Coordination fee, $6,200, paid. At 6, the doorbell rang twice and then graduated to knuckles. Through the peephole, Brad stood on my porch with 2 men. One carried a clipboard in a leather folio. The other had the kind of square stance that means security even when there's no logo on a jacket. I didn't open the door. Helen Brad called, switching to my first name like a man changing lanes without signaling we need to discuss move-in logistics. I turned off the lamp nearest the door, stood back, and did not move. 10 minutes later, the trio left a rumble of male voices fading down the walk. When they were gone, I phoned Alan. His voice was already moving when he answered. Tell me everything, he said, and I did. When I got to the pink receipt, he said, You're not staying there tonight. I'm in my house, I said. You're in your house, he agreed, and you're staying at mine. I packed a small bag nightgown robe, the ledger, the blue card, a sweater that could double as a blanket. I left Mr. Alvarez a note in my mailbox visiting a friend. Back soon. H. Then I locked my door and turned the key once more for the sound of it. Alan's guest room smelled faintly of starch and ginger. He handed me a spare phone charger and said the couch was fair game if I didn't like soft mattresses. I filed the emergency petition an hour ago, he said, handing me a copy with timestamps marching down one edge. We're on the docket first thing. If the judge signs it, we'll take it to Nora together. Will they come, I asked. They tend to, he said. A person who's pushed this far doesn't often stop at a polite line. I slept with the ledger under the corner of my pillow and dreamed of fairy horns I couldn't place the sound coming from land instead of water. The courthouse was built to make people small. Even with my best shoes, the floors managed to convince me my heels were narrower than they were. A bailiff with the tidy mustache of a man who knows how to iron looked at our file, looked at me, and called us forward. The judge read silently, his thumb notched on the page like a bookmark. He signed in the space where the signature went a slow, deliberate motion, as if the ink needed time to brace itself. Outside, Alan touched my elbow. "We go to Evergreen. You ready?" "I'm tired," I said, "but ready." Evergreen Mutual's lobby was different on a weekday morning. Fewer wool coats, more fluorescent vests from contractors depositing checks. Nora met us at the door of her office, already standing, which I took as a sign she expected the room to fill. She'd pinned her hair up, and her eyes had the alertness of someone who spent the night sorting file folders in her head. "We've scheduled a meeting," she said, and then the door opened and Jenna slipped in, followed by Brad. He wore a navy blazer and a righteous expression. Jenna had clearly cried at some point this morning and had powdered the evidence. A uniformed officer took up a station by the glass panel and nodded once to Nora. His name tag read Graham. "Let's be efficient," Nora said to the table, which was absolutely not a request. Brad spread his hands. "We're here for Mom's convenience. Joint access helps us respond quickly. We've already started coordinating care." "Joint access permitted 2 transfers," Nora said evenly, totaling $20,950. One marked as a facility deposit, one as a fee. "It's called planning," Brad said. "It's called spending," I said, my voice level. Graham's radio hissed once and then settled. Alan slid the court order onto the table between us. "Your access is frozen pending investigation," he said, "effective upon service." Jenna reached for the paper, then drew her hand back, like she'd remembered the heat of a pan. "An investigation," she said. "Into what?" "Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult," Alan said, and nodded to Nora, who clicked a key. The audio file from Saturday began to play. My name stated the date, Nora's careful explanation of the scope of joint access. Brad's voice was steady, Jenna's bright. On the recording, you could hear the moment my yes mislanded the glass on crooked coaster of it. You could hear a chair leg scrape and the faintest catch of breath when I had pressed the folded note into a teller's hand. Nora paused the file. She opened another window. On the screen, grainy but sufficient, the security camera showed the tops of our heads on Saturday. There was Brad's hand on my shoulder, the angle of his thumb. Even silent, the image illustrated pressure. Graham watched the screen without moving. Alan's pen was still in his hand, but he was not writing. "Mom," Jenna said suddenly, and the word came out raw. "We didn't mean—" "Stop," Brad said to her too quickly, and then to Nora. "A shoulder is not a weapon. Neither is a signature," Nora said, "unless it's used to cut." Graham stepped forward just enough to remake the shape of the air. "The order says no further contact pending review," he said, tapping the top page. His voice was unadorned. "You'll need to step back from Mrs. Mercer and from her accounts. Attempts to circumvent will be documented." "Documented," Brad repeated as if the syllables were foreign currency. Alan placed a second document beside the first. "Notice to Willow Harbor," he said. "They'll be returning the deposit and the coordination fee. If they have questions, they can address them to me." Jenna pinched the bridge of her nose the way she does when a migraine threatens. "We thought we were helping," she said, but she didn't look at me when she said it. I folded my hands on the table. They looked like my mother's hands for the first time, tendons visible, knuckles square. "You decided for me," I said. "You spent my money to make the decision stick." For a long moment, no one spoke. In that kind of quiet, even the hum of an office feels like a verdict. Graham shifted his stance by an inch, the security man's version of a final period. Nora slid a simple form across the table and spoke to me, not to the room. "Mrs. Mercer, I have recorded that you are competent, that you expressed hesitation at the original appointment, that you later reported unauthorized activity, and that a court order is now in effect. I will process the freeze and note that further withdrawals require your in-person authorization only." "Thank you," I said. Brad looked like a man adjusting to a room that had changed shape. "This is ridiculous," he said. "She's being manipulated. Look at her. Does she seem like she understands high-level financial decisions?" Graham half turned his attention, finding the exact middle of Brad's forehead. "Sir," he said, "enough." Jenna's mouth crumpled and then smoothed. She pushed her chair back an inch. "Can we at least—" "No," Alan said, not unkindly. Nora stood. "We're done." Outside the office, the lobby felt larger than it had when I'd walked in. The robin's egg cardigan teller glanced up and gave me a small clandestine smile that didn't require acknowledgement. Nora walked us to the door, then pulled me aside and slid a paper across her palm to mine, the way I had with the receipt days earlier. It was a straightforward printout on standard paper, contacts fraud unit, direct line. "Use it if you need it," she said. "I hope I won't," I answered. On the sidewalk, the day did the Pacific Northwest thing of pretending it wasn't going to rain, and then raining anyway. Alan offered me his umbrella and I took it. The court order went into his briefcase and the ledger came home with me heavier for being the same weight. At the house, the porch plants needed water but had gotten it. I unlocked the door and stood just inside with my hand still on the knob until the quiet rearranged itself into something familiar. The pill organizer sat square on the counter. The radio was off. The Mariners could tangle their own late innings without my help. I wrote the time and place in the ledger, then the words order served in my small, neat hand. The ink bled a little on the curve of the D where I pressed too long. I brewed tea and carried the mug to the living room, where the afternoon light gathered at the edge of the rug and turned the wool into a shallow gold. The phone rang once, then again, then not at all. Outside, the fairy horn carried up the hill and broke against the windows in a little sheet of sound. I let it fade and opened the window anyway. The air smelled like cedar and wet iron. When evening came, the house clicked the way it does when it remembers the day is over. I washed my cup and set it upside down on the towel to dry. Then I put the ledger on the nightstand, turned out the lamp, and lay very still in my own room while the rain worked at the gutters like a patient instrument, steady and unargumentative, until the notes found each other and the house at last held. Morning flattened the last of the rain into a soft shine on the porch rail. I made coffee and stood by the window while steam ghosted the glass. The house had that after-storm hush, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. When I opened the ledger, yesterday's ink had dried to a steady gray. Order served. I drew a line beneath it, the kind I used to put under a balanced column when the numbers finally agreed. By 10, Alan called. His voice carried the scrape of early miles. "You'll see activity," he said, and a minute later the banking app brightened, reversal 14,750 followed by reversal 6,200 Yeah. Numbers coming home aren't the same as money never leaving, but the feel of it is close enough to keep a person upright. I didn't answer Jenna's first message, or the second, the one with a careful sentence about loving me, and words like miscommunication and oversight folded into it as if vocabulary could be a bandage. I set the phone on the counter and listened to the radio long enough to catch the score and turn it off again before a late-inning collapse could make a metaphor of my afternoon. The next day, I went to the branch alone. Evergreen smelled like carpet and coins, but underneath I could detect coffee. Someone had brewed a new pot. The teller with the robin's egg cardigan smiled without spectacle. Ms. Mercer Nora said from her doorway, and the steadiness of it loosened a muscle I hadn't known I'd been holding. We sat two women at a desk with a stack of paper that would change who could touch what and when. I signed where I chose to in ink that belonged to me. She placed each completed page in a folder and squared the corners with a neat palm. On the way out, I touched the glass door. It was cool and solid and opened when I pushed nothing more dramatic than that. At home, I rehung the calendar page I'd taken down during those days when time felt like something my family was measuring for me. I penciled in Ava's recital Jenna had sent the time without adjectives and underlined it once. I left the rest of the squares blank on purpose. The quiet filled in. On Thursday, Mr. Alvarez returned my note to me by holding up two thumbs when we passed on the sidewalk, which is Tacoma for, "I've got your back if you don't feel like saying so out loud." I staked the dahlias with twine straighter this time and deadheaded a burst of petals that had outlived themselves. In the afternoon, Ava came by to run the same stubborn A through a different reed. When she finished, she set her oboe on the table as carefully as a sleeping infant and told me I made excellent tea. I told her lungs had gotten stronger. Both statements were true. Saturday brought the recital in a gym that smelled like varnish and oranges. I sat in a row of folding chairs and watched children make music happen in fits and starts, a small miracle every time it landed on its feet. Jenna looked at me across the room, once a brief glance that contained too many things to count. Brad examined the program with the absorption of a man studying the terms of a contract he could not rewrite. I clapped at the appropriate places and kept my face arranged in the expression the world expects from a woman who is proud and present and no longer available for negotiation. Afterward, I left a note with the usher for Ava. "You were brave and precise. Come practice next week," and walked home by way of Wright Park where the trees hold the shape of weather in their branches. The air smelled of damp bark and something green that can't be named. When Jenna called this next morning, I answered. "The kids miss you," she said, and then softer, "I do too." "You can drop them at the park at 2, I said. "Pick them up at 4. "Mom." "That's the arrangement," I said, and stayed quiet until she agreed. They came bouncing all knees and elbows in reports. The twins argued about whether raspberries tasted better warm from a bush or cold from a refrigerator. Ava asked if the A sounded different in a gym than in my living room. "It does," I said. "Your house doesn't echo." We fed the pond geese a handful of oats I'd brought in a paper bag, and I told the boys the proper way to hold a handful for a blunt beak. A goose declined to bite anyone. Small victories counted twice that week. Jenna and Brad stayed at the curb. At 4, he checked his watch, and she practiced a smile I recognized from her girlhood, the one she used when she wanted me to say yes before I knew the question. I hugged my grandchildren and returned them, and when Jenna said, "Can we talk?" I shook my head. Not then, not there. She nodded to her credit as if she'd been practicing that also. 2 weeks later, the phone learned a new refrain silence. It turns out quiet has variations too. Some days it's a soft thing that pads around on socks and lets a person read the paper. Some days it's a thin humming wire between you and a doorbell that doesn't ring. When the quiet sharpened, I went to the library and shelved mysteries in the L's and the M's where clues stack especially well. Dorothy from the front desk told me her sister had started rearranging their mother's pill packs to help, and then used the word boundaries in a way that made it sound like a fence you paint together. We didn't tell each other how to live. We compared notes on weather and dough recipes and the administrative burden of love. The first letter arrived at the end of a month I can now recount only by the placement of empties in the recycling bin. It had my name in Jenna's handwriting on the front and the careful distance of an envelope that had not been licked in a hurry, inside 3 pages in blue ink. She wrote about fear in the way it dresses itself up as practicality. She wrote about control without using the word control until the second page. She wrote about a counselor named Mara, who does not accept but as a connector between apology and excuse. Near the end, she said, "I don't know how to be your daughter without trying to organize the drawer," and I could see the drawer, the one with rubber bands and birthday candles, and a screwdriver that lives where it doesn't belong, and I felt something unclench. I didn't answer the letter that day. I slid it under the ledger's back cover so it would lie flat, while my reaction found its edges. The next morning I took it out and read it again in the kitchen, where the light tells the truth. Then I wrote 4 lines on a card. "I hear you. Thank you for writing." The park Saturdays at 2 still works. Keep doing the work you describe. I signed my name and mailed the card before lunch. Invitation without surrender, that was the line I could walk and still recognize the shape of myself in the mirror. Summer leaned in by inches. The dahlias blew themselves extravagant as if excess were a strategy for staying upright. The ledger's pages filled more slowly, a return here. The notation of a check to the roof man, who fixed a downspout that had been muttering all spring. A little drawing of a dahlia beside a date I wanted to keep. One evening, I found myself at the boardwalk again, where the water is always the color of a decision made by weather. Gulls worked the ferry's wake. A man cast a line and didn't look hopeful about it, but cast anyway. I stood long enough for my hips to complain, and then 5 minutes longer because sometimes complaint is not the same as a reason to leave. The kids came to the park most weeks. We ate peaches that dripped down wrists. We decided a goose honk sounds like a laugh in the wrong key. Ava fixed that A for good. When Jenna met my eye at pickup, she held it for a heartbeat and then lowered her gaze, not in defeat, but in acknowledgement of a rule we were both learning to keep. Brad kept to the sidewalk. Once he said afternoon with a neutral vowel and nothing else. I'm not sure he knows another way to say it. In late August, Nora and I ran into each other at the grocer's, both leaning over the same display of corn evaluating silk. She asked, as a friend asks if the quiet had been useful. I told her the ledger got lighter in my hands. "Good," she said. "Some tools should feel like tools, not weights." On impulse, I bought an extra dozen shortbread cookies and dropped them at the branch for the staff with a note that said, "Thank you for the work no one sees." One afternoon, I found the old pill organizer in the drawer with the birthday candles and the screwdriver under a bald rubber band and a scatter of thumbtacks. I ran it through hot water and dish soap and thought about throwing it out. Then didn't. It snapped shut with the same satisfying click it always had. I placed it back in the drawer, not because I needed it, but because the sound it made when it closed was part of my kitchen's grammar, and I was not in the business of erasing myself. When the dahlias finally tired and the air smelled like cedar and pencil shavings, a second letter came. Fewer words this time. I'm still going. Jenna wrote, "It is slow work." She didn't ask for anything, not even forgiveness. She included a drawing from one of the twins, a lopsided goose with my initials on its wing. I put it on the fridge and stepped back until the magnet held. That evening I made a pot of soup with carrots that insisted on orange, not the tasteful purple the store had suggested. I set a bowl and spoon on the table and then without thinking set a second place and laughed at myself and moved the extra spoon back to the drawer. Outside the ferry horn sounded. I wrote the time in the ledger, though there was nothing to record except the fact of being there to hear it. When I turned out the kitchen light, the window made a mirror again. For a moment I saw 2 rooms, mine and the one the glass pretended. In both a woman stood alone, steady as a railing. Behind her a garden that had needed staking and had gotten it. In front of her a table set for exactly the number of people who would be eating. The house held. The night took its time. The edges stayed where I put them. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If this story resonated with you or made you reflect, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to share them in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. I'll see you next time as we continue exploring more journeys and lessons together.